He walked into the prison yard with nothing but a folded list of rules and the quiet hope of surviving another day. The air was thick with stares, some curious, most calculating. A gang leader watched from across the yard, seeing only a new face, an easy target to prove his control. No one cared that this rookie had once fought battles of a very different kind, where gloves replaced blades and respect was earned, not taken. But in a place where violence speaks louder than truth, one mistake would change everything. Because the day began like every other in prison, until someone picked the wrong man to break. Before the cell doors closed on him, Marcus Hall had lived a life built on discipline. Raised in a tight-knit neighborhood surrounded by noise and doubt, he found purpose in boxing, each punch a promise to prove he was more than people's assumptions. Championships, headlines, and respect followed, but one wrong decision, a fight outside the ring that spiraled out of control, stripped everything away. Now he was just another inmate in an overcrowded prison, labeled before anyone cared to know his story. Guards looked at him through the same cold lens as everyone else, while inmates sized him up, testing boundaries. Marcus kept quiet, his eyes down but his mind sharp, remembering how control had always been his real weapon. But silence only invited danger. Rumors spread fast in prison, especially about newcomers. And in a world where prejudice thrived behind steel bars, Marcus was already marked before he could even take his first breath of stale air. Somewhere across the yard, a gang leader watched him closely, mistaking calm for weakness. What neither of them realized was that a storm was brewing, one that would soon shake the very codes that ruled their world.
The days inside crawled like shadows, slow, heavy, and always watching. Marcus kept to himself, spending hours doing push-ups in his cell or pacing the cracked floor until lights out. But distance doesn't go unnoticed in a place built on dominance. His quiet confidence became the spark for suspicion. Some saw calm, others saw arrogance. And when supremacy, ego, and prejudice mix within prison walls, tension is never far behind. It began with whispers. A few inmates from the yard called him Pretty Boy Boxer, twisting the truth about his past into mockery. They claimed he was pampered, that he thought he was better because of who he was and where he came from. The words echoed through concrete halls until they reached Ortiz, the gang leader who ruled the block. To Ortiz, Marcus wasn't just a new face. He was a challenge to crush, a way to prove that power didn't belong to men like him. The first confrontation was small, almost childish. A shove at chow time that sent Marcus's tray crashing to the floor. A chorus of laughter followed, bouncing off the steel tables. Marcus stared at the mess, chest tight, hands trembling at his sides. Every muscle screamed to hit back, to remind them who he really was. But he didn't. He just bent down, cleaned the spill, and returned to his seat. Silence can be louder than defiance. And everyone noticed. The next few days blurred into a quiet hunt. Guards looked the other way when Ortiz's men cornered Marcus in the hallway, muttering racially charged slurs meant to chip away at his composure. It wasn't just bullying. It was the same virus he'd fought his whole life, now thriving in a place with no witnesses and no justice. Marcus tried to stay invisible, but you can't hide from those who've already decided you don't belong. Each insult, each threat chipped at his restraint. Still, he remembered his old trainer's voice. Control wins fights before the first punch is thrown. So he waited, observed, counted steps, studied their habits, planned exits. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was preparing. One night, while the others slept, Ortiz passed by Marcus's cell, tapping the bars with a smirk that promised something worse than words. Tomorrow, he said, his voice low, but sharp as glass. Yard time. Then he walked away. Marcus lay awake under the flickering light, his heart steady but his mind racing. Outside those bars waited a fight he didn't want but couldn't avoid, and this time the battle wasn't for victory. It was for dignity, for the right to exist as more than a stereotype, even in a place designed to erase humanity. Morning would come soon, The siren would blare, the doors would open, and Marcus would step into that open yard of eyes and judgment. But no one, certainly not Ortiz, knew what was coming. The storm Marcus had buried inside was ready to rise, and the world behind those walls was about to witness what happens when a man pushed to the edge finally decides to stand. The morning sun spilled across the yard, bright, too bright for what was about to happen. Concrete glared like a spotlight, catching every stare as inmates spread out in small clusters, sensing the tension. Marcus walked with steady steps, his breath slow, every nerve tuned like a wire about to snap. Ortiz and his crew stood near the weight benches, waiting, smirking. The guards lingered nearby, but didn't move. Everyone knew what this was. No one would stop it. Ortiz stepped forward, words dripping with venom, the kind meant to cut deeper than fists. He called Marcus names that echoed centuries of hate, each one trying to remind him of the box the world had built for men like him. Laughter rippled through the crowd, feeding the fire. Marcus didn't answer, not with words. The first shove came hard, the second even harder. When Ortiz swung, Marcus felt time slow. His instincts took over. Years of discipline, sweat, and survival exploded in a blur of movement. One hit, then another. The sound wasn't cinematic, it was raw. Gloves replaced by knuckles, cheers by stunned silence. Ortiz crumbled under the weight of strikes that carried years of suppressed rage, dignity, and pain. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about being seen. When the guards finally rushed in, dragging Marcus back, the world seemed to tremble. Blood, sweat, disbelief, everything hung in the air. Some inmates looked at him differently now, not as a newcomer, but as something unshakable. Yet Marcus saw no victory in it. He saw what it had taken for anyone to notice him: violence. As they pushed him into the concrete wall, cuffing his wrists, his gaze found the horizon beyond the chain-link fence. For a second, he wondered, how many times must a man prove his worth before he's allowed peace? The yard fell silent. The same walls that once mocked him now held their breath. And somewhere, deep inside that silence, the story of Marcus Hall stopped being just another prison fight. It became the moment one man's truth forced the world to look back.
The hours after the fight blurred together. Sirens, cell doors slamming, the dull ache of bruises that went deeper than bone. Marcus sat alone in solitary, his hands trembling not from pain, but from everything the moment had forced into the open. For the first time, people in that place had looked at him, had seen him, not the label, not the stereotype. But what haunted him was what it took to be seen. Days later, word spread. Some inmates stopped using the slurs. Others nodded quietly when he passed. Even a guard, one who had turned away during the attack, found himself lowering his gaze in shame. It wasn't much, but in a place built to strip men of humanity, those small changes felt like cracks of light through stone. Marcus used his time to teach again. Push UPS turned into lessons, sparring into mentorship. He showed younger inmates how to fight without hatred, how discipline could rebuild what anger wanted to burn. And slowly, the story of what happened in that yard spread beyond the walls. People wanted to know about the boxer who refused to break, about the injustice he endured, and the quiet power of the man who stood back up. Because what happened to Marcus wasn't just a prison story. It was a reflection of something larger, a world that still measures worth by color, still mistakes silence for weakness, still forces people to prove their humanity one painful moment at a time. He served his sentence, walked out years later into the same world that had judged him before, only stronger now. But his question remains, echoing beyond those walls, beyond his story into ours. How many times must a man endure injustice before the world learns that strength isn't born from power, but from dignity?